Abigail Whitmore had buried that name Carter like a stone in winter ground. She had not spoken it in 6 years, had not let herself feel it, dream it, or whisper it in the dark. But the moment she stepped through those gilded doors and saw him standing at the far end of the ballroom, tall, still, unmistakable, every buried thing rose at once. She reached down and gripped Samuel's hand. "Stay close," she whispered. "All three of you, stay close." If this story moves you, subscribe to our channel and follow along until the very end. And drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The dress was borrowed. Abigail had not wanted to come at all. She had stood in front of the mirror in her sister's spare room and told herself 3 times that this was business. Nothing more. Nothing sentimental. Nothing dangerous. She needed the land contract. The northern parcel had been tied up in legal dispute for 2 years, and tonight was the only occasion when Commissioner Hargrove would be accessible outside his office, away from his gatekeepers and his assistants, and his wall of polite refusals. She needed 20 minutes of his time. That was all. She had told herself that was all. She had not told herself what she would do if Nathaniel Carter was there. The governor's spring ball drew every family of consequence in Virginia. She had known that. She had told herself he might attend, and had decided it did not matter that she was not the same woman who had loved him, that 6 years had made her someone harder and quieter and less foolish. She had 3 boys to feed. She had a farm that needed saving. She did not have the luxury of old heartbreak. And then she walked through the door. And he was standing 40 feet away. He had not changed. That was the cruelest thing. He had not changed the way she had changed. She had changed in every possible way. Her hands were rough now. There were lines beside her eyes that hadn't been there before. She had learned to split firewood and negotiate with creditors and tell her sons that everything was fine when it was not even close to fine. Nathaniel Carter stood in the center of the room in a dark coat, talking to 2 men she didn't recognize, holding a glass with the easy confidence of a man who had never once doubted his place in any room he walked into. Abigail stopped breathing. "Mama!" Samuel tugged her sleeve. "You're squeezing too hard." She loosened her grip, forced herself to exhale. "Sorry, sweetheart." She looked down at all 3 of them. Samuel on her left, Benjamin on her right. Noah pressed against her side with his thumb, hooked into her sash, the way he always did when he was uncertain about a place. "Listen to me. We are here for 1 hour. We speak to Commissioner Hargrove. We sign nothing tonight, and we go back to the inn. You understand?" "Is there food?" Benjamin asked. "There is food." "Then I understand completely." Noah was already scanning the room with those quiet, careful eyes of his. Of all 3 boys, Noah was the one who missed nothing. He had been that way since birth, watchful, unhurried taking in a room the way some people read a page slowly and completely before moving on. "There are a lot of people," he said. "Yes," Abigail said. "Stay close." She turned left deliberately. Commissioner Hargrove would be near the eastern corridor. She had been told that had planned her approach, had rehearsed what she intended to say. She was going to walk directly there without looking back toward the center of the room. She was going to handle this with the efficiency she had developed over 6 years of handling everything alone. She made it approximately 12 steps before Benjamin pulled free. "Benjamin, I just want to see the musicians. Benjamin Carter, you come back here, right?" She said the name without thinking. She said it the way she always said it at home, automatically the name they had given all 3 boys, because she had not been able to bring herself to give them anything else, not her maiden name, not a fiction. Whatever had broken between her and Nathaniel, the boys were his sons. She had refused to pretend otherwise, even if he would never know it. She said the name, and across the room, a glass stopped moving. She didn't see it happen. She was already reaching for Benjamin's collar, pulling him back gently, murmuring his name again under her breath. She didn't see the way Nathaniel Carter's head lifted. Didn't see the way his eyes cut through the crowd with the instinctive precision of a man who had just heard something that made no sense and needed to locate the source. She didn't see any of it. She just felt it. The way you feel a door open in a room you thought was sealed. A change in the air. A pressure that had no visible cause. She turned. He was looking at her. Not the general sweep of a man glancing around a crowded room. Looking at her fixed and still and pale in a way that had nothing to do with the candlelight. His eyes moved down. To Samuel. To Noah. To Benjamin, who was craning his neck toward the string quartet with absolute no awareness that anything in the world was wrong. Nathaniel Carter stood completely motionless. Abigail had been afraid of many things in the past 6 years. She had been afraid of the cold winter when the firewood ran low. She had been afraid the first time Samuel ran a fever that wouldn't break. She had been afraid every time she sat across from a bank officer who looked at her like she was nothing more than an inconvenient signature. She had never been afraid like this. "Boys," she said. Her voice came out calm. She was proud of that, proud and terrified simultaneously. "Boys, stay right beside me." She turned toward the eastern corridor and walked. She did not run. Running would draw attention, and she had spent 6 years learning that the worst possible thing she could do in any difficult situation was to look like she was running. She walked steady, deliberate, with her chin level and her hand wrapped around Noah's small wrist and her eyes fixed on the far end of the room. She heard footsteps behind her, measured, unhurried, certain. She walked faster. The footsteps kept pace. "Ma'am?" She stopped. That voice. 6 years, and that voice could still reach into the center of her chest and take hold of something. She turned slowly. Nathaniel Carter stood 6 feet away. Up close, he was not unchanged. She could see that now. There were shadows under his eyes that hadn't been there before. A hardness around his jaw that she didn't remember. He held himself the same way, straight, composed, giving nothing away in his posture that he hadn't decided to give. But his eyes were doing something she had never quite seen them do. They were searching her face like a man looking for an answer to a question he didn't know how to ask. His gaze dropped to the boys. Samuel looked up at him with the quiet, assessing expression that always made strangers uncomfortable, and made Abigail's heart ache because it was so thoroughly his father's expression she could barely stand it. Benjamin was already examining the buttons on Nathaniel's coat with visible curiosity and zero sense of social propriety. Noah had tucked himself behind Abigail's skirt, but was watching Nathaniel with enormous, careful eyes. Nathaniel stared at them for a long moment. Then he looked back at Abigail. "I apologize," he said. "I don't mean to intrude." His voice was steady, controlled. She recognized the control the way he had always managed difficult conversations, speaking slowly and choosing each word like a man who had learned early that careless words cost more than careless actions. I heard the name." "I beg your pardon?" "Carter." His jaw was tight. "You called one of them Carter?" Abigail said nothing. "These boys," Nathaniel said. He stopped, tried again. "These are your sons?" "Yes." The word was barely sound. "They are 6 years old." It was not a question. The way he said it, flat, quiet, a little wrecked around the edges, told her he had already done the arithmetic. Men like Nathaniel Carter were good at arithmetic. He had built an empire on it. "Nathaniel, 6 years." He said it again, softer, like he was testing the weight of it. "We separated in the spring of 1812. These boys are 6 years old. I think we should not do this here. I think," he said very quietly, "you should tell me their names." She looked at him for a long moment. Around them, the ball continued its relentless turning music conversation, the soft percussion of 100 social performances happening simultaneously. No one was watching them yet. She was aware that would not last. "Samuel," she said at last. "Benjamin." She paused. "And Noah." Something moved through his expression, something she couldn't name and wasn't sure she was supposed to see. "Samuel, Benjamin, and Noah Carter." Yes, the single syllable cost her more than she could account for. Nathaniel looked at the boys again. He crouched down slowly, carefully, the way a man approaches something he is afraid of startling, so that he was at their eye level. It was such an unexpected gesture that even Benjamin stopped examining the coat buttons. "Hello," Nathaniel said. Benjamin, who had never in his 6 years on Earth met a social situation he could not charge directly into, stuck out his hand. "Hello, sir. Your buttons are very fine." A sound escaped Nathaniel that might under different circumstances have been a laugh. He shook Benjamin's hand seriously. "Thank you. They were my grandfather's." "Were you very rich when you were little too?" "Benjamin," Abigail said, "it's all right." Nathaniel's eyes moved to Samuel, who was still watching him with that careful evaluating expression. "And you, sir?" Samuel considered for a moment. "You have the same nose as us," he said finally. The color left Nathaniel's face. "Samuel." Abigail said, her voice cracking at the edge. "It's true," Samuel said simply. He was not being cruel. He was 6, and he said true things. "We saw a portrait of grandfather once, and Mama said we got our noses from the Carter side. You have the same one." Nathaniel stood up very slowly. He looked at Abigail. She met his eyes because she owed him that much at least. She had owed him many things, and paid very few of them, and she knew it. "We should not do this here," she said again. "No," he agreed. His voice had gone very quiet. The kind of quiet that meant something was moving underneath it at great pressure contained by force of will rather than ease. "We should not. I came tonight for the land contract. I have business with Commissioner Hargrove. I intend to complete that business and return to the inn." "Where are you staying?" "I don't think that's—" "I am not going to come to the inn," he said evenly. "I am asking because I want to know you are safe. The roads out of the city are not— I have been keeping myself and 3 children safe for 6 years without your assistance," she said. It came out sharper than she intended. She saw it land, watched the slight tightening at the corners of his eyes, and found she did not have enough left in her to be sorry for it. He absorbed it without flinching. "I know," he said quietly. "I know you have." That was worse somehow. She had been braced for argument, and he gave her something she didn't know how to deflect. "I need to find Commissioner Hargrove," she said. "He is by the east window." Nathaniel took a step back. "I will not stop you." He paused. "But Mrs. Whitmore Abigail." She stiffened at her name in his mouth. "I would like to speak with you. Not tonight. When you have finished your business. I will not make demands. I will not. I only want to speak." He stopped. The composure cracked just slightly, just at the edges, just enough for her to see the man underneath the careful exterior. The one who was looking at 3 boys, with his eyes and his hands and his nose, and trying to hold himself together inside a room full of Virginia society. Please. It was the please that did it. Not the gravity, not the restraint, not the careful measured words. The please small and undefended, in a way that Nathaniel Carter almost never allowed himself to be undefended. "I will send word to your house," she said, "when I have decided." He nodded once. She gathered the boys and turned toward the east window and did not look back. Behind her, Nathaniel Carter stood still in the center of the governor's ball as the music played on and the candles burned and Virginia society swirled and glittered around him, completely unaware that his entire world had just rearranged itself without permission. He stood still for a long time. Then he set his glass down on the nearest table very carefully, the way a man sets something down when his hands are not entirely trustworthy, and walked toward the door that led to the gardens where no one would see his face, until he had decided what expression it was going to wear. Why, the boys were quiet on the walk to the east window. Even Benjamin, which was remarkable. It was Noah who finally spoke in the small, careful voice he used when he was working something out. "Mama," he said. "Yes, love." "That man." A pause. "Why did he look at us like that?" Abigail kept walking. "Like what?" Noah thought about it for a moment the way he always thought about things seriously, completely with his whole small self. "Like we were something he'd lost," he said. "And he didn't know he'd lost it until just now." Abigail did not answer. She pressed her hand to Noah's back and guided him forward through the crowd, and she did not trust herself to say a single word. Abigail found Commissioner Hargrove exactly where Nathaniel said he would be. She hated that. She hated that even now, even after everything, Nathaniel Carter was still right about things. Hargrove was a wide man with a red face and the self-satisfied expression of someone who had never once been told no by anyone who mattered. He was holding a glass of bourbon in each hand, which told Abigail everything she needed to know about how this conversation was going to go. Mrs. Whitmore. He looked surprised to see her. Then he looked at the three boys beside her, and the surprise curdled into something less welcoming. I wasn't aware you'd be attending this evening. I sent a letter, Commissioner, 3 weeks ago. Did you? It was not a question. It was a dismissal dressed as a statement. I did. She kept her voice pleasant. She had learned to keep her voice pleasant the way other women learn to keep their stitching even through relentless grinding practice. The Northern parcel dispute has been ongoing for 2 years. My late husband's estate attorney filed the initial claim in the spring of 1816. I have all documentation. Mrs. Whitmore. Hargrove set one of his glasses down and looked at her with the patient condescension of a man explaining weather to a child. Land disputes of this nature require considerable review. These things take time. 2 years is considerable time. These things are complicated. The documentation is not complicated. The parcel was deeded to my husband in 1809, and the counterclaim was filed by a party who cannot produce a valid title because no valid title exists. She smiled. I would be happy to walk through it with you. I have the papers. Hargrove glanced at the boys again. Benjamin was balancing on one foot. Noah was watching Hargrove with an expression that suggested he had already formed an opinion. Samuel was reading the title spines of the books on the nearby shelf. Perhaps, Hargrove said slowly, this is not the appropriate setting. I agree, Abigail said, which is why I requested a formal appointment 3 weeks ago and received no response. This was the only available opportunity. She kept the smile in place. I am simply a widow, trying to protect her children's inheritance, Commissioner. I'm certain a man of your standing understands the importance of that. She watched the calculation move through his eyes, the weighing of inconvenience against the social cost of being seen dismissing a widow and her children at a public event. Thursday, he said finally. 2 o'clock. I'll be there. She turned away before he could change his mind, and that was when she heard it. A woman's voice carrying clearly through a gap in the surrounding conversation, with the particular precision of someone who was not entirely displeased to be overheard. Carter boys, they're saying. 3 of them. Identical. Abigail's steps slowed. She came under a different name apparently. Whitmore, she's calling herself. But someone recognized her. She was Carter's wife years ago, before the separation. I'd heard she ran off. That's what we were all told, wasn't it? The voices moved away into the crowd. Abigail stood completely still with 3 boys around her, and the certain knowledge that the clock she had been living under for 6 years had just run out. Mama! Samuel's voice was quiet and even, the way it always was when he sensed trouble before being told about it. Are we leaving? Yes, she said. We are leaving right now. She got them as far as the entrance hall. Eleanor Carter was standing at the base of the main staircase. Abigail had not seen the woman in 6 years. Eleanor was older. That was her first observation, and then immediately she felt guilty for making it, and then she stopped feeling guilty, because Eleanor had earned every year on her face through deliberate and sustained cruelty. She was dressed in deep blue silk, and she wore the expression of a woman who had expected this moment and prepared for it carefully. She looked at Abigail. Then she looked at the boys. Something moved through Eleanor's face. Not guilt, not sorrow, not any of the things a decent person might feel. Something more like a general calculating of odds. Abigail, she said pleasantly, what a remarkable surprise. Mrs. Carter. Abigail kept her voice even. If you'll excuse us. You came all this way and you're leaving so soon. Eleanor's eyes moved over the boys slowly. And these must be your sons. My, they do favor their well. She let the sentence sit unfinished, a small, deliberate detonation. They favor the Whitmore side, I'm sure. We are leaving? Abigail said. Of course. Eleanor stepped aside graciously. But as Abigail moved to pass, the older woman's voice dropped just low enough that only Abigail could hear it, warm and private as a knife. You should not have come back, Eleanor said. I dealt with this once already. I am not above dealing with it again. Abigail looked at her. She had 100 things she could have said. She had been saving them for 6 years. The particular words you assemble in the dark when you have nothing else to do but think about the conversation you'll never get to have. And standing here in the entrance hall of the governor's ball, with 3 6-year-old boys at her side, and Eleanor Carter looking at her like she was a problem to be managed, every single one of them left her. What came out was this: I came for a land contract. I have it. We are leaving. And if you touch my children... She stopped. Started again. If you go anywhere near my sons, Eleanor, I will burn every secret you have kept to the ground, and I will make certain every person in this state is holding a torch when I do. Eleanor's expression did not change, but she did not say anything else. Abigail walked out with her boys. The inn was a 20-minute ride outside the city. She held it together for all 20 minutes, sat straight in the hired carriage, answered Benjamin's questions about the musicians with complete coherence, tucked Noah against her side when he fell asleep against her arm. She held it together until all 3 boys were in bed in the small room adjoining hers, until she had kissed each forehead in the dark and said the same thing. She said every night, I love you, you are safe. Tomorrow is a good day, and pulled the door gently shut. Then she sat on the edge of her own bed and pressed her hands over her face and allowed herself exactly 5 minutes. That was the arrangement she had made with herself 6 years ago. 5 minutes. She could fall apart for 5 minutes, and then she had to put herself back together because there was no one else to do it. She was 3 minutes in when the knock came. She almost didn't answer it. She was in no condition to answer doors. But the knock came again, quiet, measured, not the knock of someone who was going to go away. And she recognized it, the way she recognized his voice, deep in some part of her body that had not finished forgetting him, despite 6 years of explicit instructions to do so. She opened the door. Nathaniel stood in the corridor with his hat in his hands. He had taken off the fine coat. He was in his shirt sleeves, which was highly improper for a man of his standing, and it told her he had not come here to perform anything. He looked tired in a way the ballroom had concealed. Not tired the way men were tired after a long day, tired the way people were tired after a long time. I asked at the front desk, he said. I shouldn't have. I apologize. What do you want, Nathaniel? He looked at her steadily. I want to understand what happened. I think you understand well enough. I don't. He said it quietly, without heat. I do not understand, Abigail. I have been standing in that garden for 2 hours, trying to build it into something I understand, and I cannot do it. He stopped. Will you let me in? She should have said no. She opened the door wider. He came in and stood near the window, not sitting, holding his hat with both hands. Abigail sat in the chair near the fireplace and did not offer him anything, and waited. You were pregnant, he said at last. When we separated. I didn't know yet. I found out 6 weeks later. 6 weeks. He worked through the arithmetic again, the same way he'd done it in the ballroom, and she could see it cost him. And you didn't tell me. No. Why? She looked at him. Because of the letter. Something shifted in his expression. What letter? The letter you sent me, 3 weeks after I left. She kept her voice level, kept it informational, kept it stripped of everything that lived underneath it, because if she let any of that out, it would not stop. The one that said you had considered the matter and agreed the separation was for the best. That you wished me well. That your family situation required your full attention and that you hoped I would find happiness. She paused. That letter. Nathaniel was very still. I never sent that letter, he said. I received it in your handwriting on Carter stationery with your seal. I never sent it. She stared at him. Nathaniel, I wrote to you every week for 4 months. He set his hat down on the windowsill, just put it down like his hands needed to be free, like he needed every available part of himself for this conversation. Every week, I told you I had made a mistake, that I had let my mother convince me of things I should have seen through. I asked you to come back. I told you. He stopped. His jaw was tight. I told you I loved you, several times, which is not as I think you know something I say without meaning it. Abigail had gone cold. I never received any letter from you, she said. Not one. I assumed your silence was your answer. They looked at each other across the small room. She intercepted them, Abigail said. It was not a question. It landed in the room with the specific weight of something that had always been true and had just now been named. Nathaniel sat down heavily on the edge of the bed. She told me you had written, he said. She told me you had written and said you were well, that you'd gone to your sister's, that she said you were already making a new life. I was making a new life. I was making it because I thought you had chosen your family over me and sent me a letter to prove it. I chose you, Nathaniel said. I had chosen you. That was what the months of letters were. I was choosing you over and over and apparently mailing those choices into nothing. The words came out with a flatness that was worse than anger. 6 years, Abigail. I know. I have 3 sons. I have never... He stopped. He pressed his hand over his mouth for a moment and looked at the wall. I have missed 6 years. She did not try to give him anything consoling. There was nothing consoling to give. It was simply true. 6 years, 3 boys, 1,000 ordinary days that could not be recovered. What did you tell them? He asked after a moment. About their father. That he was a good man who loved them before they were born. She had chosen those words with great care 6 years ago and had not deviated from them. That circumstances had separated us. That it was not their fault and never would be. He looked at her. Thank you, he said. It came out rough. They are your sons, she said simply. Whatever happened between us, they are your sons. I was not going to teach them to hate a man I had not given a fair accounting of. The silence that followed was the complicated kind, full of things that hadn't been said yet, and a few things that were starting to arrange themselves into questions. It was Nathaniel who broke it. The letter you received, he said. The one supposedly from me. Do you still have it? She looked at him steadily. Yes. I would like to see it. I imagine you would. She went to her traveling bag and withdrew a small leather case she had carried for 6 years, not sentimentally, she had told herself, practically. Evidence. She had told herself it was evidence in the event she ever needed it, and apparently that practical instinct had been correct. She handed him the letter. Nathaniel read it. His face was very still. When he finished, he read it again. Then he set it on his knee and stared at it for a long time without speaking. The handwriting, he said. It's yours. It is not mine. He looked up. It is a very accurate copy of mine which my mother has had 40 years to practice. But the phrasing... He touched the paper lightly. There are 3 phrases in this letter that my mother uses. Not me. I would never say she writes, I trust you will understand. And I have never once written those words in my life. His voice had gone very quiet. She wrote this. She wrote it and she sent it under my seal and she let you believe. He stopped, stood up. He walked to the window and stood there with his back to the room, and Abigail watched his shoulders carry the weight of what he was assembling. She told me, he said very low, that you had asked not to be contacted further, that a continued correspondence was causing you distress. He turned. I believed her. God help me, I believed her because she is my mother and because I was... He stopped again. I was ashamed of how I had handled everything, the way I had let her run our household, our marriage, our... The word that came next was the one he had the most trouble with. I was ashamed that I had been weak enough to let it happen, and I told myself that my silence was the least I could give you, that you deserved to be free of all of it. She knew I was pregnant, Abigail said. He turned sharply. What? I don't know how. But the timing the letter I received arrived exactly when I was trying to decide whether to write to you about the pregnancy. She kept her voice steady with effort. Someone was watching me. I didn't understand it at the time. I understand it now. Nathaniel looked at her with an expression she could not fully interpret. Horror and fury. And something underneath both of those that was older and quieter and more devastating. She wanted to be certain, he said. Yes. She wasn't content with the separation. She wanted to make certain nothing could bring us back. Yes. The word sat in the room between them. It was Nathaniel who moved first, not toward her, not across the space between them. Just a step sideways, like a man who needed to redistribute the weight of what he was carrying. I need to speak to her, he said. Nathaniel. I need to speak to my mother. Not tonight, Abigail said. Not in this state. He looked at her. What state? The one where you can't quite hold your face together. She said it plainly without cruelty. I've been watching you manage it for the past hour, and you are managing it very well. But you are not all the way managing it, and speaking to Eleanor tonight will give her an advantage she does not deserve. He was quiet for a moment. You're right, he said. I know. Something crossed his expression. In another life, in a different version of the story, they had started before it was intercepted and redirected by someone else's scheming hand. She thought that look might have been the beginning of a smile. There are things I need to ask you, he said. About them, about the boys. I know that. Samuel, he reads, doesn't he? The way he was looking at those book spines. She felt something open in her chest, small and cautious and aching. He taught himself at 4. He goes through everything I bring him in a week, and then starts on whatever he can find. He particularly likes natural history. Nathaniel looked at the wall between the two rooms, as if he could see through it. I used to read natural history, he said, almost to himself. When I was a boy, my father's library. He stopped. Benjamin, he's fearless, she said, completely, absolutely fearless. He has no understanding of his own smallness. He walked up to a bull once when he was 4, and I had the worst 10 seconds of my life, and he came back completely unconcerned and told me the bull had kind eyes. She paused. He is also extraordinarily kind, underneath all the noise. And Noah. She was quiet for a moment. Noah, she said finally, is the one who will break your heart. Not on purpose. Just he sees things. He has always seen things. He noticed something tonight that I couldn't. She stopped. He told me you looked like someone who had lost something and didn't know it until just now. Nathaniel pressed his eyes closed briefly. He wasn't wrong, he said. The candle on the table between them had burned down to a low, warm light. Outside, she could hear the distant sounds of the city settling carriages' voices, the ordinary machinery of Virginia at midnight. I am not asking anything from you, Nathaniel said. He opened his eyes. I want to be clear about that. I am not standing in this room to make demands or claim rights or... He stopped, chose his words more carefully. I lost 6 years because I was not paying close enough attention. I am not going to compound that by walking back into your life and behaving as though nothing has to be earned. He looked at her directly. I would like to know my sons. I would like the opportunity to... The word cost him. To try. Abigail looked at him for a long time. She had been angry for 6 years. She had been lonely for 6 years. She had sat in the dark in a cold farmhouse in January, with 3 small children asleep in the next room, and told herself that she was fine, that she did not need him, that she had become someone who could carry anything. She had not been wrong about any of that. She had also not been entirely fine. I need to tell the boys, she said. He waited. I need to tell them in my own way, in my own time, with the words I choose. You don't come to this farm unannounced. You don't send gifts without my knowledge. You don't make promises to them that you have not cleared with me first. She held his gaze. These are my terms. Accepted? He said immediately. I'm serious, Nathaniel. I know you are. He picked up his hat from the windowsill. I have never in my life met anyone more serious than you, Abigail Whitmore, and I mean that as the highest possible compliment." She stood and walked to the door and opened it. He moved toward her, stopped at the threshold, and she could feel him deliberating something. She could see it in the set of his jaw, the careful restraint of a man who was holding several things back simultaneously. "For what it's worth," he said, "I would not have given you up willingly. I want you to know that. Whatever you decide going forward, whatever you decide about—" He stopped. "I would not have let you go if I had known." She looked at him. "I know," she said quietly. It was the truest thing she had said all evening. He nodded once, put his hat on, and walked down the corridor. She listened to his footsteps until they turned the corner. Then she closed the door and stood very still in the center of her small inn room. In the next room, she heard Noah murmur something in his sleep. She pressed her hand flat against the wall between them. Then she went to the small desk, sat down, and began to write a list of everything she needed to do before Thursday. She was not a woman who had the luxury of being undone. But in the very corner of the last page below, the legal notes, below the list of documents, below the practical and the pressing and the necessary, she wrote 2 words in handwriting that was slightly less steady than she would have liked. He came. The next morning, Virginia woke up, and Virginia talked. By the time the sun was fully over the hills, there were 3 separate versions of the story circulating through the social networks of Richmond in parlors, and across breakfast tables, and in the careful, murmured exchanges of women who understood that information was currency. The first version was factual. Abigail Carter, formerly of the Carter estate, had appeared at the governor's ball under an assumed name, and had brought 3 children who bore an unmistakable resemblance to Nathaniel Carter. The second version was embellished. She had appeared dramatically confronted. Nathaniel publicly made a scene. The third version was the one that traveled fastest because it was the most interesting someone had seen. Nathaniel Carter leave the ball early, and someone else had seen a hired carriage parked outside the Whitmore Woman's Inn until well past midnight, and someone else's cousin's housekeeper had heard something about a letter. By 10 in the morning, Eleanor Carter had received 4 visitors. She received them in her sitting room with the gracious composure of a woman who had been managing crises for 40 years, and she said the appropriate things, and she expressed the appropriate concern. And when the last visitor had gone, she sat alone in her blue chair and looked at the wall. She had been very careful 6 years ago. She had been meticulous. She had intercepted every letter with her own hands. No servants, no intermediaries, no possible witnesses. She had burned everything she took from Nathaniel before it left the house. She had crafted the letter to Abigail in her own study alone with the door locked. She had been certain it was finished. The problem with certainty, Eleanor had learned, was that it made you stop checking. She had stopped checking. She had settled into the comfortable assumption that Abigail Whitmore would stay small and rural and far away, and that Nathaniel would eventually marry someone appropriate. And that the 3 boys, if she let herself think about them as anything other than an inconvenience, which she generally did not, would remain on whatever modest farm their mother was managing and never trouble her world again. She had been so certain. She picked up the glass of water on her side table and set it down again without drinking. There was one thing she had miscalculated, one variable she had not fully weighted. Nathaniel, when he wanted something, was patient in a way that other men were not. He did not rage, and he did not rush, and he did not perform his determination for anyone else's benefit. He simply decided, and then he moved in that direction steadily and without deviation for as long as it took. She had seen it once as a strength and had spent years guiding it toward her own purposes. Now it was going to be used against her. She had seen it in his face last night. She had been across the ballroom, and she had seen it the moment he looked at those 3 boys, and something in him went completely, absolutely still. She had one advantage, and she knew it. She had burned the letters. There was no proof. There was nothing but Abigail's word against hers, and in Virginia, in 1818, the word of a widow farmer from a disputed land parcel weighed rather less than the word of Eleanor Carter of Carter Hall. She reached for a piece of writing paper. She needed to speak to her attorney. 40 miles away at the Carter estate, Nathaniel sat at his desk in the early morning and did not write anything and did not read anything and did not take any of the meetings his secretary had arranged. He sat at his desk and he thought about three boys. Samuel, who looked at the world with the particular watchfulness of a child who had learned early that paying attention was a form of protection. Nathaniel recognized it because he had learned the same lesson in the same house at roughly the same age. Benjamin, who had shaken his hand with complete seriousness and complimented his coat buttons, who was by every account brave in the way that only people who had never been given a reason to be afraid could be brave. Noah, who had seen something true in 2 minutes that most adults would not have seen in 2 years. He thought about Abigail standing in the entrance hall of the governor's ball, with those three boys arranged around her and her chin level and her eyes telling him clearly that she had not come here for him, would not be undone by him, and was managing everything just fine. Thank you. And underneath all of that, just barely visible, the exhaustion of a woman who had been managing everything alone for 6 years. He thought about the letter she had shown him, his mother's words in his handwriting on his stationery. He had not slept. He picked up his pen and set it down and picked it up again. He could confront his mother. He had every intention of confronting his mother. But Eleanor Carter did not respond to confrontation the way ordinary people did. She absorbed it, deflected it, and filed it away for future use. He needed more than anger. He needed something she could not talk her way around. His secretary knocked. "Mr. Carter, you have a visitor." "I said no meetings." "It's Mr. Aldridge, sir, the attorney." A pause. "He says it's urgent. He says it concerns letters." Nathaniel put down his pen. "Send him in," he said. The door opened, and an old man came in, white-haired, slightly stooped, with the deliberate movements of someone managing a conscience that had become heavy over time. Nathaniel had known George Aldridge peripherally his whole life. The man had handled Carter estate matters for 30 years, had been his father's attorney before becoming his mother's. He was carrying a leather satchel. He set it on the desk without preamble, without pleasantries, with the air of a man who had made a decision and was moving through it before he could change his mind. "I have been carrying these for 6 years," Aldridge said. "I have told myself several times that it was not my place, that what your mother does within her own household is not my concern." He pressed his mouth together briefly. "I have decided that I was wrong." Nathaniel looked at the satchel. "What is in that?" "Letters," Aldridge said. "Letters your mother did not burn. Letters she kept, why I cannot say with certainty. Perhaps because she wanted proof of her own cleverness. Perhaps because she could not bring herself to destroy everything." He stepped back from the desk. "Letters your wife wrote to you, Mr. Carter, over the course of approximately 8 months following your separation." He paused. "And letters you wrote to her, which were intercepted before they reached the post." The room was very quiet. "She kept them," Nathaniel said. "She kept them." Nathaniel opened the satchel. The top letter was in Abigail's handwriting. He recognized it the same way he had recognized her across a crowded ballroom, immediately, completely, something in him responding before his mind caught up. He unfolded it. Nathaniel, she had written, "I am writing this for the 3rd time because the first 2 times I burned it before I finished. I don't know if you'll receive this. I don't know if you want to hear from me. But I have to tell you something because it's yours to know, and I will not keep something that belongs to you. I am going to have a child." Nathaniel sat very still with the letter in his hands. Outside the window, Virginia summer moved on without him, green and gold, and completely indifferent. And Nathaniel Carter read the first honest correspondence he had received from his wife in 6 years, and understood finally and completely exactly what his mother had done. He read every letter. It took him 2 hours. Aldridge had quietly let himself out sometime in the first 20 minutes, and Nathaniel had not noticed until he looked up and found himself alone. He did not blame the man for leaving. There was nothing comfortable about being present while someone's understanding of his own life rearranged itself completely. There were 31 letters in the satchel, 14 from Abigail, 17 that he had written himself, his own handwriting. His own words returned to him 6 years too late, like something the tide had finally decided to give back. He read Abigail's first. She had written to tell him about the pregnancy in 3 separate letters. each one slightly different in tone. The first, careful and formal, the second more urgent, the third stripped down to almost nothing. Just the essential fact, stated plainly, because she had apparently given up on finding the right way to dress it. Nathaniel, I am carrying your child. I believe you should know. Please write to me when you receive this. He had never received it. He had never received any of it. He read his own letters next, and that was in some ways worse, seeing his own words come back to him, the things he had said in those months of believing she had simply gone silent, the way his tone shifted from letter to letter. The first ones were careful, measured the way he wrote everything. By the 5th letter, the care was starting to fray. By the 10th, he was writing things he would not ordinarily have committed to paper, not because they weren't true, but because they were too true, the kind of true that left you exposed. I have made every mistake a man can make in a marriage, he had written in what appeared to be letter number 12, and I am not asking you to forgive any of them. I am only asking you to let me try to be worthy of forgiveness. I understand if the answer is no. I need you to say it yourself. She had never said it, because she had never seen it. When he finished, he stacked the letters back in their order and sat for a long time without moving. Then he stood up, put on his coat, and called for his horse. His mother was in this garden when he arrived at Carter Hall. She was cutting flowers, which was such a precise domestic tableau that he almost could have laughed Eleanor Carter, the woman who had spent 40 years arranging other people's lives with the focused attention of a general standing in her garden with a basket over one arm and a pair of shears in her hand, as if this were an ordinary morning. She heard his horse. She turned, and in the space between turning and composing her expression, Nathaniel saw something he had never seen on his mother's face before. Fear. It was gone in a second, replaced by the familiar, composed pleasantness she wore the way other people wore skin. But he had seen it, and knowing it was there, changed the entire architecture of the conversation before it had even started. Nathaniel, she set the shears in the basket. I didn't know you were coming. No, he said. You didn't. He dismounted. He did not take his hat off. He did not make any of the small gestures of social courtesy that had been trained into him since childhood, and he watched his mother register the absence of them and understood from the slight adjustment in her posture that she understood what it meant. Come inside, she said. I'll have coffee brought. I have the letters, Mother. She stopped. Aldridge brought them to me this morning. He kept his voice even. He had decided on the ride over that he was going to be even, not cold, not explosive, not any of the things she would know how to manage. Even, factual, like a man presenting evidence in a courtroom. 31 letters, 14 from Abigail and 17 from me, which apparently never left the property. Eleanor said nothing. You kept them, he said. I've been trying to understand that part. You kept them. You burned the ones she sent to the post so they would never reach her, but you kept the ones from the house. He paused. Why? She looked at him with an expression that was working very hard to be sorrow and landing slightly short. Nathaniel, you don't understand the full. Tell me what I don't understand. She was not right for you. The words came out plainly, with a conviction that had clearly been living in Eleanor Carter so long it felt to her like common sense. She was a farmer's daughter. She had no family of consequence, no connections, she was my wife. She was unsuitable. Eleanor set the basket down. You were young, and you were infatuated, and you would have spent the rest of your life watching your estate diminish under the management of a woman who did not understand how any of it worked. You had no right, Nathaniel said. I had every right. I was protecting this family. You stole 6 years from my sons. His voice did not rise. He had promised himself it would not rise. Not from me, not from Abigail, from Samuel and Benjamin and Noah, who are 6 years old and have never once had a father, because you decided alone in your study that Abigail Whitmore was unsuitable. He stopped. Let that sit. You will tell me what else you did. I don't know what you mean. The letter you sent her, the one in my handwriting. He watched her face. There are phrases in that letter that you use, that I have never used. I recognized them this morning, and I will not pretend I didn't. He stepped closer. You forged my signature, mother, on a document designed to end my marriage. That is not protecting this family. That is a crime." Eleanor lifted her chin. "You would not take me to court." "No," he agreed. "I would not take my own mother to court." He let a beat pass. "But I would tell the truth. Publicly. Completely. To every person in Virginia who has spent the past 6 years believing that Abigail Whitmore abandoned her marriage." He held her gaze. "I would tell exactly what happened, and I would show them the letters, and I would let them draw their own conclusions about the Carter family name." The blood left Eleanor's face. "You wouldn't try me," he said quietly. "Tell me what else you did." A long silence. Then slowly, like a woman lowering something she had been holding at arm's length for a very long time, Eleanor Carter sat down on the garden bench. "There was a woman," she said. "Margaret Hale. She was Abigail's friend. They had known each other since childhood. Margaret came to me 6 months after the separation and told me that Abigail had found lodging in Charlottesville, that she was—" She stopped. "That she was with child." Nathaniel went absolutely still. "She came to tell me because she thought I should know. She thought perhaps it would change things." Eleanor's voice had gone flat. Not remorseful, something more distant than remorse, the tone of someone recounting facts they have long since made peace with. "I paid her to leave Virginia. To tell Abigail that she had left for her own reasons." "You removed her support," Nathaniel said. "Abigail's closest friend. While she was pregnant. Alone." "She was not alone. She had her sister. You isolated her." The evenness in his voice was costing him considerably now. "You took away the one person who might have helped her reach me, and then you paid her to disappear." He looked at his mother. "Is there more?" "No," Eleanor said. She said it with the finality of someone who has reached the bottom of something and is relieved to find it, even if what's there is ugly. "No. That is all of it." He stood there for a moment. "I am going to fix this," he said. "Nathaniel. Not for you, not for me." He picked up his hat from where he'd set it on the fence post. "For them. For 3 6-year-old boys who deserve better from every adult in their lives, including me." He put his hat on. "I will handle this in the way that causes the least damage to the boys. But I will handle it. And you, mother." He looked at her one last time. "You will not contact Abigail. You will not go near those children. If I find that you have interfered in any way with what I am trying to build, I will make every letter in that satchel available to anyone who wishes to read them." He mounted his horse. Eleanor sat on the garden bench with her basket of flowers and her shears and watched him go. Abigail was splitting firewood when the Carter carriage came up the road. She heard it before she saw it, the particular rhythm of a well-maintained team on a poor road, and she set the axe down and pressed her hands against her skirt and reminded herself that she had agreed to this. She had sent word. She had made her terms clear. She was not going to fall apart because a carriage was coming up a road. Benjamin came flying off the porch. "Is that a Carter carriage? That's a Carter." "Benjamin, stop." "But it says Carter on the side." "I can read, sweetheart. Go get your brothers." He ran. She heard him shouting inside the house, and then all 3 of them appeared at once in the doorway, with the unified energy of boys who have sensed that something significant is happening and have no intention of missing it. Samuel came to stand beside her. He did not say anything. He just stood there, which was his way of indicating support, and she was grateful for it in a way she could not have explained without embarrassing them both. Nathaniel stepped down from the carriage. He was in plain clothes, not the formal coat from the ball, not the estate owner uniform she would have expected. Plain coat, plain hat, the kind of clothes a man wore when he was not trying to impress anyone. He had a small wooden box under one arm. He stopped at the edge of the yard and looked at her. "Mrs. Whitmore." "Mr. Carter." She paused. "You're early." "I know. I apologize." He glanced at the axe still embedded in the splitting block. "I should have—" "It's fine." She looked at the boys. "Samuel, Benjamin, Noah. Come here, please." They came, Benjamin at a run. Samuel at a measured walk, Noah tucking himself against her side with his thumb in her sash. Nathaniel crouched down. He had done this at the ball too, come down to their level instead of talking over them, and she noticed Samuel notice it the way he noticed everything. "Hello again," Nathaniel said. "Hello," Benjamin said immediately. "You came to our farm." "I did. Your mother was kind enough to allow it. We have a cow. Her name is Perseverance." "That's an excellent name for a cow." "Mama named her," Benjamin said. "She says it's important to name animals for qualities you'd like them to have." Nathaniel looked up at Abigail very briefly. Something moved in his expression. "Your mother is a wise woman," he said. "We know," Noah said quietly from his position against Abigail's side. Samuel had not said anything yet. He was watching Nathaniel with that careful assessment of his, the one that made grown men uncomfortable without knowing why. Nathaniel met his gaze and held it without flinching, which Abigail noted. "You brought something," Samuel said finally. "The wooden box." "I did." Nathaniel set it on the ground between them and opened it. Inside were 3 books, a collection of carved wooden horses, and a letter sealed with plain wax. No Carter crest, no formal markings, just sealed. He left the letter to the side and let the boys see the rest. Benjamin picked up a horse immediately. Noah approached the books with the careful reverence he applied to everything. Samuel looked at the titles, then looked at Nathaniel. "You brought natural history," he said. "Your mother mentioned you enjoyed it. She told you about me." "A little." Nathaniel met his eyes. "I'd like to know more if that's all right with you." Samuel considered this for a long, serious moment. "All right," he said at last. It was such a small permission, barely anything, and Abigail watched Nathaniel receive it like it was significant, which told her everything about what this visit was costing him, and what he understood about what had to be earned. She picked up the letter. "That's for you," Nathaniel said quietly. "Not urgent. When you have time." She nodded and slipped it into her apron pocket. "Boys," she said, "why don't you show Mr. Carter Perseverance?" He stayed for 3 hours. Benjamin showed him the cow with great ceremony and some exaggeration. Noah showed him the garden, walking him through each plant with a seriousness that Nathaniel matched perfectly, asking questions and listening to the answers with his full attention. Samuel brought out 3 of his books and showed Nathaniel a passage about migratory birds, and then watched very carefully while Nathaniel read it. And when Nathaniel looked up and said, "I didn't know they navigated by stars. I had assumed it was rivers." Samuel visibly decided something. Abigail watched all of it from the porch and refused to feel anything about it and failed completely. When the boys finally scattered toward other business and she and Nathaniel were left with a brief stretch of quiet, she said, "You're good with them." "I'm trying," he said. "They're not difficult to be good with." "Don't let Benjamin hear that. He'll use it." "I suspect he uses everything." Accurately. A moment of ordinary quiet. The kind they had not had in 6 years. The kind that required a certain basic level of trust to exist at all. "I spoke with my mother," Nathaniel said. Abigail went still. She confirmed everything. The letters the friend she paid off there was a woman, Margaret Hale, who came to tell her you were pregnant. She paid her to leave Virginia. "Margaret," Abigail said quietly. It landed like a stone dropping into still water. "I wondered why she stopped writing. I thought I assumed she had simply moved on." "She was removed," he said. "Deliberately. I'm sorry." Abigail looked at her hands. Margaret Hale had been her closest friend since childhood. The one she had wept in front of during the worst weeks. The one who had brought food and sat with the boys when they were newborns, and Abigail was so exhausted she could barely form a sentence. And then one day the letters had stopped, and Abigail had told herself that people moved on, that she was perhaps too much of a burden, that she should not be surprised. "She took everything," Abigail said. "Not to Nathaniel exactly. To the truth of it." "Yes." "And she kept the letters." "Yes." Abigail was quiet for a moment. Why keep them? I've been thinking about that. Nathaniel turned his hat in his hands. I think she kept mine because they were proof of her own power. Proof that she had stopped something, redirected it, managed it. And yours. He stopped. I think she kept yours because she needed to know, on some level, what she had taken. The letters told her what she had taken, and she kept them. It was a devastating thing to say, and the more Abigail thought about it, the more she believed it was true. What are you going to do? She asked. I'm going to acknowledge the boys publicly, as my sons, as Carter's. He kept his voice steady. I'm not going to ask your permission for that, because it's the truth, and the truth doesn't require permission. But I am asking how you'd like it done, and when, and what you'd like them to know before it happens. Abigail looked toward the field where she could hear Benjamin shouting about something. I need to tell them, she said. Before anything becomes public, they need to hear it from me. Of course. And she stopped. I need them to have time, to understand it at their own pace. Benjamin will probably take it at a run, and Noah will sit with it for a month, and Samuel will have 17 questions, all of them excellent. She pressed her hands together. They are not props in our story, Nathaniel. They are people. I know that, he said quietly. They made that extremely clear in the past 3 hours. She almost smiled. Samuel's questions. He asked me 4 of them before we reached the fence. He glanced at her sideways. He asked me where I had been. The almost smile stopped. What did you tell him? I told him I had been in Virginia managing the estate, and that I had not known about him as long as I should have. He met her eyes. I did not tell him more than that. It was not my truth to tell. She nodded. But I did not lie to him, Nathaniel said. I need you to know that. I will not lie to them. Whatever else I get wrong in this, and I expect I will get several things wrong, I will not lie to them. She opened the letter from her apron pocket. She read it standing there on the porch in the late afternoon, and what he had written was not long and not elaborate. It was simply this: I am going to make this right. Not because I deserve the chance, but because they deserve a father, and you deserve to not carry everything alone. I am asking for the chance to prove that. Take whatever time you need. I will still be here. She folded it. This is not simple, she said. I want you to understand that. Even with everything explained, even with the letters, even knowing what your mother did, it is still not simple. 6 years happened. I have built a life in those years. I have become someone in those years, and she did not require a husband to become her. I know. I am not going to undo that because you came to the farm and read natural history with my son. I'm not asking you to. I don't know yet what I'm asking for, she said, or if I'm asking for anything. Then that's where we are, he said simply. That's all right. He stood up, picked his hat off his knee, and called toward the field. Boys, I'm heading out. 3 boys came from 3 different directions, which told her they had been considerably closer than they'd appeared, and Benjamin arrived first, slightly out of breath, holding the carved wooden horse. Can you come back? Benjamin asked. Nathaniel glanced at Abigail. If your mother says so, he said. Every head turned to her. She looked at 3 pairs of eyes, 1 bold one, careful, 1 quiet, and waiting, and at the man standing at the edge of her yard with his hat in his hands, asking for nothing, promising nothing, just standing there. Thursday, she said. Bring your own lunch. Benjamin threw both arms in the air. That evening, after the boys were in bed, Abigail went to the small box she kept under the floorboard in her bedroom. It had been there for 6 years. She had told herself it was practicality documents, the deed, the original marriage record. Things she might need for legal purposes. Things that might matter. She told herself that every time she opened it, she took out the letter she had kept, the one she had received 6 years ago in his handwriting, or what she had believed was his handwriting, the one that had ended everything. She read it again. Now knowing what she knew, she could see it. The phrases her mother-in-law used. The particular construction of the closing sentence, too formal, too final, too composed for a man who, as she now knew, had been writing her emotional and urgent letters at the same time, this cold dismissal was supposedly being composed. She had carried this letter for 6 years as evidence of his indifference. It was evidence of something else entirely. She set it down on the table. Tomorrow, she needed to speak to her boys. She needed to find words adequate to 6 years of incomplete truth. She needed to be honest with them in the way she had always tried to be honest with them, simply, plainly, without theatrical emotion, because they were her sons, and they deserved to understand their own lives. And underneath all the practicality of what needed to happen next, underneath the careful plans and the reasonable terms, and the management of a situation that was still enormously fragile and unclear, something else was turning over slowly. He had come. He had read the letters and gone to his mother and come to the farm in plain clothes with 3 books and a box of wooden horses, and had crouched in the yard and listened seriously to everything her boys said to him. He had not asked her for anything. He had just come. She pressed the back of her hand to her mouth for a moment. Then she picked up the forged letter, held it to the candle, and let it burn. She did not know who saw the Carter carriage on the road to her farm. Somebody always saw. That was the nature of the country. Roads were shared, and neighbors were observant, and news traveled on ordinary conversation, the way seeds traveled on wind, casually, and without asking permission. By Sunday, 3 families had mentioned it to their pastors. By Monday, it had reached the sitting rooms of Richmond. By Tuesday afternoon, a woman named Constance Beaumont, who had been Eleanor Carter's closest friend for 30 years, and whose sense of social loyalty operated in Eleanor's direction exclusively, arrived at Abigail's door with 2 other women Abigail did not recognize, and an expression that suggested this was not a social call. Abigail opened the door. "Mrs. Whitmore," Constance said pleasantly. "What a charming little farm. May we come in?" "No," Abigail said. Constance blinked. "I know why you're here," Abigail said, "and I don't intend to justify myself on my own porch to women I didn't invite." She looked at the 3 of them steadily. "If Eleanor Carter has something to say to me, she can say it herself. Eleanor is simply concerned. Eleanor," Abigail said, "can be concerned on her own property." She reached for the door. "Good afternoon, ladies." She closed it. Through the window, she watched them confer for a moment and then turn their carriage around. Her hands were shaking slightly. She pressed them flat on the table and breathed through it. "Mama." Noah appeared from the hallway. "Yes, love." "Were those ladies mean?" "They were delivering someone else's meanness," she said. "That's slightly different." She looked at him. "But it doesn't matter. We are fine." "I know," he said. "We're always fine." She looked at her youngest son, the one who saw everything, who said true things in quiet voices, who had told her the previous evening that he thought the man from the ball seemed sad in an old way. Like someone who'd been sad so long, he'd forgotten he was sad. "Noah," she said, "I need to talk to you and your brothers about something. Tonight after supper." He looked at her carefully. "Is it about our father?" he said. She stared at him. "Samuel figured it out," Noah said simply. "He said the nose was the same, and the way he listened, and the name." He paused. "We didn't want to ask before you were ready to tell us." Abigail sat down on the bench. 3 6-year-old boys had known for days and had quietly waited for her to be ready. She pressed her eyes closed. When she opened them, Noah was still standing there with his grave, patient eyes waiting. "Yes," she said. "It's about your father." He nodded once. And then, with the matter-of-fact kindness that had been native to him since birth, he came and sat beside her on the bench and put his small hand over hers. They sat there together in the quiet of the farmhouse kitchen, while Virginia Afternoon moved outside the window, and neither of them said anything, and it was enough. She told them that night after supper. She had rehearsed it 6 times in her head while washing the dishes, different versions, different arrangements of words, different ways to enter the truth gently enough that it wouldn't land like a blow. She had been preparing for this conversation in some form or another for 6 years. Had known it was coming, the way you know winter is coming, and still sitting down at the table with 3 boys looking at her with their father's eyes. Every rehearsed version left her completely. So she told them the plain truth. She told them that their father was Nathaniel Carter, that she and Nathaniel had been married and had separated before the boys were born, and that for reasons she would explain more fully when they were older, Nathaniel had not known about them. That he knew now. That he had come to the farm on Thursday not as a stranger, but as their father, and he would like if they were willing to know them. She stopped talking and waited. Benjamin spoke first, which surprised no one. "Is that why he brought the horses?" he asked. "I think partly, yes. I thought they were very fine horses." Benjamin considered this for a moment, with the focused moral seriousness he applied to questions of quality. "He can come back." "Benjamin, he listened to everything I said," Benjamin said. "Most grown men stop listening after the first 2 sentences." He kept going. He picked up his carved horse and turned it in his hands. "And the buttons. He told me about the buttons." Samuel had not said anything. He was sitting very straight with his hands flat on the table, looking at the wood grain, which was what he did when he was processing something too large to process quickly. "Samuel," Abigail said gently. "I knew," he said. "I told the others." "I know you did. I wanted you to tell us yourself." He looked up. His eyes were steady and serious, and so thoroughly his father's eyes that she had to work to hold his gaze. "Why didn't you tell us before the ball?" "Because I was afraid," she said. "Not of him, of getting it wrong, of giving you something and then having it taken away." She paused. "That was my failing, not his. I should have trusted you to handle the truth." Samuel thought about this. "That's fair," he said finally. "You should have." It was the most Samuel thing he had ever said, and she felt tears threaten and refused them absolutely. Noah had been quiet through all of it, in the way he was always quiet, not absence, but full presence, taking everything in. He was looking at her now with those enormous, careful eyes. "Does he want to be our father?" he asked. "Actually want to, not just because he's supposed to." "Yes," she said. "I believe he does." "How do you know?" She thought about Nathaniel crouching in the dirt, yard hat off, listening to Benjamin describe the personality of a cow. She thought about him reading 3 paragraphs of Samuel's migratory bird book and asking a real question about it. She thought about him watching Noah walk through the garden and matching his pace to Noah's without being told to slowing down, when Noah slowed, stopping, when Noah stopped. Because of the way he paid attention, she said. "A man who doesn't want to be somewhere doesn't pay attention like that." Noah sat with that for a moment. Then he nodded once with the gravity of someone who has rendered a verdict. "Okay," he said. Nathaniel came on Thursday as agreed with his own lunch and no fanfare. He brought nothing for the boys this time, which Abigail noticed and appreciated. He was learning the difference between gestures that said, "I want you to like me," and presence that said, "I'm here regardless." He sat with Samuel for an hour, going through the natural history books, not teaching, but discussing. Treating the 6-year-old's observations with the same consideration he would give a peer. He helped Benjamin repair a fence post that had been leaning at an alarming angle since February, and Benjamin talked the entire time, without pause, about 14 different subjects, and Nathaniel followed every thread. He found Noah sitting alone behind the barn with a stick drawing something in the dirt, and instead of asking what it was or suggesting Noah come join the others, he simply sat down nearby and was quiet until Noah decided to speak. Noah spoke eventually. He said, "Do you know about stars?" Nathaniel said, "Some." Noah said, "Samuel says birds navigate by them. Do you think people do too? Not with their eyes, but inside?" Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. "I think some people do," he said. I think some people spend a long time going the wrong direction because something interfered with their compass, and then they find their way back. Noah looked at him. Were you lost? Noah asked. Yes, Nathaniel said. For a long time. Are you found now? Nathaniel looked at the farmhouse where Abigail was visible through the window, moving through the kitchen, and at the barn where Benjamin was still explaining something loudly to nobody in particular, and at Samuel sitting on the porch steps with his book. I'm finding my way, he said. Noah nodded and went back to his drawing. When Nathaniel came around the front of the barn and found Abigail there, she did not tell him she had been close enough to hear. She just handed him a cup of coffee and went back inside, and he stood in the yard and drank it and watched his sons and did not say anything at all. He came back the following Thursday, and the one after that. He never came unannounced. He never stayed past the time agreed upon. He never made promises to the boys that he hadn't first cleared with Abigail. And on the one occasion, when Benjamin asked him directly whether he was going to live at the farm, Nathaniel had said simply, "That's not my decision to make," and changed the subject without making it awkward, which Benjamin accepted immediately, and which told Abigail he had thought carefully about how to handle it. She was watching. She knew she was watching, and she knew he knew she was watching, and neither of them addressed it directly. What they did instead was talk. Not the loaded, significant conversations, not the dissection of the past, not the negotiation of the future. Ordinary conversation, the kind that happens when two people are both present in the same space and there is no particular agenda. He asked about the land dispute, and she told him where it stood, and he made a suggestion about the documentation order that turned out to be correct. She asked about the eastern property he had been developing, and he explained the situation with more candor than she expected, including the parts that weren't going well. He told her something that made her laugh, genuinely laugh, the way she laughed with almost no one anymore, and she saw his expression when she did and looked away. It was on the fourth Thursday that Samuel asked him about the separation. Abigail was inside. She heard it through the open window and went completely still. "Mama said you didn't know about us," Samuel said. "But you were married to her. How did you not know?" There was a pause. "Because someone I trusted kept information from me," Nathaniel said. "Information I should have had." Another pause. "That was partly my failing, too. I trusted someone whose judgment I should have questioned more carefully." "Your mother," Samuel said. It was not a question. Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. "Yes." "She came here," Samuel said. "Not her. Ladies she sent. They weren't kind." Abigail pressed her hand over her mouth. "I know," Nathaniel said. "I'm sorry that happened. It won't happen again." "How do you know?" "Because I told her it wouldn't," he said. "And I meant it." Samuel appeared to be evaluating the weight of that. "Do you mean things when you say them?" Samuel asked. "Generally." "I try to," Nathaniel said. "I don't always succeed, but I try not to say things I don't mean." "Mama is like that," Samuel said. "She says if you say things you don't mean, eventually no one believes you when you do mean it." "Your mother is right. She usually is." A pause. It must have been hard. Being wrong about something that big. And then, in Nathaniel Carter's voice, something Abigail had not expected to hear. "It was the hardest thing I've ever lived with." Silence. "Okay," Samuel said. Just that. The same verdict Noah had rendered in a different voice, meaning the same thing. Abigail stepped back from the window and stood in her kitchen with her hands at her sides and her eyes on the ceiling, and breathed carefully until she trusted herself to move. The public acknowledgement came on a Sunday. Nathaniel had told her it was coming, had told her the week before specifically and with detail so she could prepare the boys and herself. He had placed a formal notice in the Richmond paper acknowledging Samuel Benjamin and Noah Carter as his sons. He had also written personal letters to 6 of the most influential families in Virginia, not asking for anything, simply stating the facts and letting the facts speak. Abigail had expected social consequences. She had braced for them, had prepared the boys with the same plainness she applied to everything. People will talk. People always talk. You hold your chin level, and you tell the truth if they ask, and you don't apologize for existing. What she had not expected was Margaret Hale. She appeared on a Wednesday morning in late summer, a carriage coming up the road, and then a woman climbing down from it, and then Abigail standing on the porch, with her heart suspended somewhere between her throat and her stomach, because she had not seen this woman in 6 years, and had spent considerable time over those years, telling herself that she had made peace with losing her. Margaret looked older. She looked like a woman who had been carrying something heavy for a long time and had finally decided to set it down, even though setting it down was going to hurt. She stopped at the foot of the porch steps. "I heard," she said, "about the letters, about what Eleanor Carter did." She stopped. "About what I did." Abigail said nothing. "She paid me $200, Margaret said. Her voice was steady, but her hands were not. $200, and told me you would be better off without people who knew too much of your business. That she was going to provide for you quietly. That the boys would be educated, that you'd have what you needed." She stopped again. "I told myself I believed her. I don't know if I actually believed her, or if I just needed the money badly enough to make myself believe her." She looked at Abigail directly. "Either way, I left you. When you needed me most. I left you." The silence between them had 6 years of weight. Abigail walked down the porch steps. She stood in front of Margaret and looked at her for a long moment. "Did you know I was pregnant?" she asked. "No." Margaret's voice cracked on the word. "I swear to you I did not know. She told me after I had already left. I think she told me because she wanted me to know I couldn't come back. That there was too much to come back for." Her eyes were wet. "I'm sorry, Abby. I have been sorry every day." Abigail breathed in, breathed out. "Come inside," she said. "The boys are at their lessons. I'll make coffee." Margaret let out a breath like she had been holding it since 1812. The twist came on a Tuesday, and it came from a direction Abigail had not anticipated. Commissioner Hargrove's office sent a letter. Not the resolution she had been expecting, not the confirmation of her land rights, but a notice that a competing claim had been filed. New documentation, a deed that had apparently surfaced predating her late husband's title, held by a land company whose principal investor was listed buried on page 3 of the attached papers as a man named Aldous Crane. Abigail stared at the name. She knew it. Aldous Crane was Eleanor Carter's brother. She sat at her table with the letter in her hands and understood with the particular clarity of a woman who had stopped being surprised by the depths of careful cruelty that Eleanor Carter had not been finished. The garden confrontation with Nathaniel had not been a surrender, it had been a delay. While Nathaniel was building trust in a farmyard, and Abigail was allowing herself gradually and carefully to believe that the worst was behind them, Eleanor had gone to her brother, and her brother had gone to his attorney, and they had manufactured a deed and filed it with Commissioner Hargrove, who had apparently decided that 200 acres of disputed land was worth whatever Eleanor Carter was offering to let it be resolved in the wrong direction. Abigail put the letter down. She picked it up again and read it twice more to be certain she was understanding it correctly. Then she sent for Nathaniel. He arrived within the hour. She handed him the letter without preamble and watched his face while he read it. What she saw was not surprise. What she saw was the expression of a man who had underestimated something and was angry at himself for it. "Crane," he said. "Your mother's brother." "Yes." He set the letter down. His jaw was very tight. "I told her she was finished. I should have been more specific about what that meant." "What are we going to do?" He looked at her. "Not what are you going to do?" She noted the pronoun had been noting the pronoun for 3 weeks. Now had been noting the gradual shift from parallel management to something that felt tentatively and with great care like a shared enterprise. "Aldridge has the original letters," he said. "All of them. If Eleanor is willing to manufacture evidence for a land claim, those letters become relevant to every court in Virginia. Her credibility and Crane's is dependent on no one knowing what she did 6 years ago." "You'd use the letters." I would make clear that I am willing to use them, he said, which is different because I don't want to use them. The boys don't need that in public record. His voice was steady. But Eleanor doesn't know what I will or won't do, and right now she's betting that my desire to protect the boys' dignity will paralyze me. He looked at Abigail. She's wrong. How do you want to handle it? He thought for a moment. Let me speak to Aldridge, and I want you to write down everything you remember about the original deed, the date, the witnesses, every detail. If the document they've filed is forged, and I believe it is, there will be inconsistencies. There are always inconsistencies. And Hargrove. Hargrove took something from someone who should not have had anything to offer him. Nathaniel picked up his hat. That is going to be a very uncomfortable conversation for Commissioner Hargrove. He was at the door when Benjamin came thundering down the hallway and stopped short at the sight of him. You're leaving already, Benjamin demanded. I'll be back Thursday, Nathaniel said. I have some business to attend to. What kind of business? The kind that protects your mother's farm, Nathaniel said simply. Benjamin considered this. Is it dangerous business? No. Is it exciting business? Moderately. Can I come? No. Benjamin accepted this with the equanimity of someone who had learned that the answer to this particular question was almost always no, and who had decided to keep asking anyway on the general principle that odds could theoretically improve. Nathaniel looked at Abigail over Benjamin's head. I'll send word when I know something, he said. She nodded. After he left, Benjamin looked up at her with his clear, uncomplicated eyes. He's good at things, Benjamin said approvingly. I like that in a person. Yes, Abigail said. So do I. It took 12 days. Nathaniel went to Aldridge. Aldridge went to 2 other attorneys. The forged deed was examined by 3 independent parties, all of whom identified the same inconsistency. The witness signatures predated the notarial commission of the officer who had supposedly certified them by 14 months, which meant the document either had traveled backward through time or had been fabricated. Hargrove was presented with this information privately in Nathaniel's study, with Aldridge present, and the letters from the satchel on the desk between them like a quiet threat that nobody needed to name explicitly. Hargrove resigned his involvement in the competing claim 2 days later and cited personal reasons. Aldous Crane's attorney withdrew the filing the following Monday. The northern parcel was confirmed as Abigail's by the end of the month. She received the documentation on a Thursday, which was already Nathaniel's day, and so he was there when the courier arrived, and she read it standing in the kitchen doorway. She read it twice. Then she set it on the table and pressed both hands flat on the paper and breathed. It's done, Nathaniel asked. It's done. He let out a slow breath. She looked at him. Your mother. I know. This won't stop her. It will slow her down, he said, and the next time she'll know I mean what I say. He met her eyes. I should have made that clear to her years ago. That is also my failing. Stop collecting your failings, she said. You'll run out of pockets. He looked at her for a moment. Then he laughed a real laugh, not the careful managed version, but the actual one, the kind that moved his whole face, and it was so unexpected and so genuinely warm that Abigail felt something shift inside her chest with a small, distinct, irrevocable click. She looked away before he could see it on her face. But she was not entirely certain she was quick enough. It was Noah who noticed first, because Noah always noticed first. He had come in from the yard to find Nathaniel and Abigail standing at the kitchen table over a map of the northern property close together, the way people stand when they have stopped being careful about space. Their heads bent toward the same point on the paper, and he had stood in the doorway for a moment and then backed quietly out. He found Samuel on the porch. They're looking at the map together, Noah reported. Samuel looked up from his book. And they're standing very close. Samuel considered this. How close? Like this. Noah demonstrated by standing approximately 6 inches from Samuel, which caused Samuel to move his book sideways, with the expression of someone who is being interrupted by information he is not sure he requested. "That is close," Samuel agreed. "Should we tell Benjamin?" They both looked across the yard to where Benjamin was attempting to teach Perseverance the cow to walk in a figure 8. "No," Samuel said. "He'll figure it out eventually. He'll make it into something enormous." "It is enormous," Noah said quietly. Samuel looked at his book and then put it down. He thought for a moment with the focused deliberation that was his particular gift. "Are you happy about it?" he asked. Noah considered the question with equal seriousness. "Yes," he said. "I think so. Are you?" Samuel picked his book back up. "Yes," he said. "I think so too." The evening it changed was in late September. The land dispute was settled. The boys had started calling him by his name. Not father, not sir, just Nathaniel, which he had said was fine, and which Abigail suspected meant more to him than fine. Margaret had been coming to the farm on Tuesdays, and something between her and Abigail was knitting itself slowly back together, careful and honest and different from before, in the way that repaired things are always different, stronger in some places and thinner in others. The boys were in bed. Nathaniel had stayed later than usual. They had been reviewing the property documentation, and then conversation had drifted. The way conversation drifted when two people had stopped monitoring it as carefully, and it was full dark before either of them noticed. He should have left an hour ago. Neither of them had mentioned it. They were sitting at the kitchen table with the remnants of coffee between them, and the conversation had gone quiet. Not the uncomfortable quiet of two people with nothing to say, but the easier quiet of two people who had temporarily run out of words and didn't mind. "I should go," Nathaniel said. "Yes." Abigail agreed. Neither of them moved. He looked at her across the table. In the low light, with the careful social management of the past months set aside, he looked like the man she had married, not the version that had been polished and complicated and made cautious by everything that had happened, but the earlier version, the one she had seen before. She'd understood how much could go wrong. "I have been trying," he said quietly, "very hard not to say something." Her heart did something irregular. "What something?" He was quiet for a moment. "That I have not stopped," he said. "That is the thing. 6 years and I did not. I told myself I had. I told myself what any reasonable man tells himself when a marriage ends and time passes and he has an estate to manage. I believed I had put it somewhere finished." He looked at her steadily. "I had not." Abigail sat very still. "I'm not saying that as a claim," he said. "I'm not saying it to pressure you or rush you or—" He stopped. "I'm saying it because I told you I wouldn't lie to you, and I have been not saying this thing for 4 months, and it has started to feel like lying." She looked at him for a long time. "I know," she said. He blinked. "I know," she said again more quietly. "I have known for some weeks. I was waiting to see if it was consistent. And—" She stood up and picked up the coffee cups. "It's consistent," she said with her back to him, setting the cups in the basin. She heard him exhale slowly. "Abigail, I am not ready," she said. "I want to be honest with you. I am not ready for what that means, and I need more time, and I will not be rushed." She turned. "But I am telling you that I know, and that I am not opposed." He looked at her with an expression that had several things in it simultaneously: relief and patience, and something that was simply very steady. "That's enough," he said. "It has to be for now." "It is." He stood and picked up his hat. "It is entirely enough, Abigail." He walked to the door. He stopped with his hand on the frame and looked back at her. "For what it's worth," he said, "I reckon I'd wait considerably longer than 4 months." She looked at him. "How considerably?" He put his hat on. "Considerably," he said, and walked out into the dark Virginia night. Abigail stood in her kitchen and listened to the carriage roll away down the road. She stood there until the sound was gone. Then she pressed her hand over her heart, not dramatically, just checking the way you check something you're not sure you trust. It was beating steadily. She turned down the lamp and went to check on her sons. October came in hard that year. The cold arrived 2 weeks early, the kind of cold that didn't ease into itself, but simply appeared one morning like a debt come due, and the farm had to move fast to be ready for it. Abigail had learned in 6 years of managing alone that there was no such thing as too early when it came to winter preparation, and so by the first week of October, the root cellar was stocked, the firewood was split and stacked, and the boys had been given their cold weather assignments with the same clarity she applied to everything. Benjamin's assignment was the animals. He took this seriously, in the way he took all physical responsibilities seriously, loudly, and with complete commitment and a running commentary that Perseverance the cow appeared to find either comforting or deeply irritating, depending on the day. Samuel's assignment was the records, the farm ledger, the supply inventory, the documentation that kept everything accountable. He had been doing this since he was 5, when Abigail had given him the ledger as an experiment and discovered that he not only understood it, but had found 3 arithmetic errors in her previous month's entries and corrected them without comment. Noah's assignment was her. He had appointed himself to this role without being asked sometime around age 4, and it consisted primarily of appearing silently at her elbow when she had been working too long, placing something warm, a cup, a blanket, occasionally just his hand within reach, and then disappearing again. He did not make a production of it. He simply understood that someone needed to watch out for the person who watched out for everyone else. Nathaniel had been coming every Thursday for 3 months. On the first Thursday of October, he arrived and found the fence on the eastern side of the property, down a section of it taken out by a fallen tree during a storm 2 nights before, and without saying anything to anyone, he tied his horse, took off his coat, and went to work on it. Abigail watched from the window for approximately 4 minutes before she went out to help. They worked side by side for 2 hours without speaking much, which was its own kind of conversation, the kind that didn't require words because the presence itself was the statement. Benjamin joined after an hour and provided narration. Samuel came out with a revised measurement for the post spacing that was technically more accurate than what they had been using. Noah brought water and distributed it without being asked, and then sat on the fence rail and watched with his chin in his hand. When it was done, Nathaniel stood back and looked at it. "That'll hold through winter," he said. "It better," Abigail said. "I'm not fixing it again until spring." He looked at her sideways. There was dirt on his hands, and his shirt sleeves were rolled to the elbow, and he looked nothing like the man who had stood in the governor's ball in a fine coat discussing politics, and he looked entirely like himself. "You know," Benjamin said, brushing his hands on his trousers, "if you lived here you could fix things all the time." The words landed in the middle of all 4 of them with the impact of a stone dropped in still water. Benjamin looked around at the sudden silence with genuine puzzlement. "What?" Samuel said. "I'm just saying, I know what you're saying." "Is it wrong?" Nathaniel looked at Abigail. Abigail looked at the fence. "Go wash up," she told the boys. "All 3 of you." They went, Benjamin still talking, Samuel steering him firmly by the shoulder, Noah casting one careful look back over his shoulder before following. Abigail and Nathaniel stood by the repaired fence in the October cold, and neither of them said anything for a moment. "He's not wrong," Nathaniel said quietly. "I know he's not wrong," she said. "That's not the same as it being simple." "No," he agreed. "It's not." She looked at him. "I need to ask you something." "Ask." "Eleanor." She kept her voice even. "She's been quiet for 6 weeks, since the land claim failed, and I need to know." She stopped, chose the words carefully. "I need to know if quiet means finished or if it means she's waiting." He was quiet for a moment. "I don't know," he said, "and I won't tell you I know when I don't." He met her eyes. "What I know is that she understands what I will do now, what I'm willing to put in front of a court and a public record if she moves against you or the boys again." He paused. "She values the Carter name more than she values winning. I think she'll be quiet." "You think?" "I think," he said. "I can't promise you certainty about my mother Abigail. She's been surprising people for 60 years. It was honest, which was what she had asked for. She could work with honest. Honest was the material she knew how to build with. "All right," she said. "All right. All right, I hear you." She picked up her coat from the fence post. "Come inside. I'll feed you before you ride back." He looked at her for a moment, with the expression she had been seeing more frequently these past weeks, the one that had several layers to it, that was not quite what she was ready to name, and that she was not quite ready to ask him to name either. "Yes, ma'am," he said, and followed her in. The letter from Eleanor came on a Monday. Abigail recognized the handwriting on the envelope and set it on the table and stood in front of it for a full minute before she touched it again. She had not heard from Eleanor directly, not once since the night of the governor's ball. The women she sent the land claim through her brother the 6 weeks of silence, since all of it had been Eleanor operating at a distance, managing things without showing her hand. This was different. She opened it. The letter was short. 4 paragraphs. Eleanor's handwriting, which Abigail now knew intimately from 6 years of studying the forged letter she had carried and finally burned. It began, "Mrs. Whitmore, I am writing to you directly because I have concluded that indirection has served no one particularly well in this situation, myself included." Abigail sat down. She read it twice. Then she sent for Nathaniel. He arrived by midday. She handed him the letter and watched his face while he read it the same way she'd watched him read the notice about the land claim, cataloging his expression for information. What she saw this time was not anger. It was closer to exhaustion. The deep kind, not tiredness, but the particular weariness of a man who has been carrying something for a long time and can feel the weight changing shape. He set the letter down. "She wants to meet you," he said. "I can read," Abigail said. "She wants to meet you without me present." He looked up. "She says she has something to tell you that she will not tell me. I know what it says. You're not going." "I haven't decided yet." He stared at her. "Abigail, she says she has information about the original separation," Abigail said. "Something beyond the letters, something she did that you don't know about." She kept her voice level. "If that's true, I want to know it. And if she's willing to tell me and not you, there may be a reason for that that's worth understanding. The reason is that she's manipulative and she knows I won't. Yes," Abigail said. "She is manipulative. She has been manipulative for 60 years, and she is very good at it." She met his eyes. "I have also been managing difficult people alone for 6 years, and I am not without resources of my own." She paused. "I will not go alone. I'll bring Margaret, and I will tell you everything that is said." He looked at her for a long moment. "I don't like this," he said. "I know." "She will try to—" "She can try," Abigail said simply. "She has already done her worst. There is nothing she can take from me now that I haven't already rebuilt from the ground up. She knows that. I think that's actually why she's writing." He was quiet. "Let me do this," she said. "Trust me." The words sat between them. He picked up his hat. "I'll be at Aldridge's office," he said. "Send word the moment you're back." She nodded. He walked to the door and stopped and looked back at her with an expression that was not quite fear and not quite admiration, but something that sat directly between them. "For what it's worth," he said, "I have never in my life met anyone I'd rather have on my side of a disagreement." She almost smiled. "Go to Aldridge's office, Nathaniel." He went. Eleanor Carter received them in her sitting room with the quiet composure of a woman who had decided something and was at peace with the decision in a way she had not been at peace with much recently. She looked older than she had at the ball. Not in years, in something less quantifiable. The particular aging that comes not from time, but from the sustained effort of maintaining a position that has become impossible to hold. She looked at Abigail. She did not look at Margaret, which Margaret accepted with the serenity of a woman who had made her own accounting and was no longer trying to correct anyone else's. "Thank you for coming," Eleanor said. "You said you had something to tell me," Abigail said. "I'm here." Eleanor folded her hands in her lap. "There was a doctor," she said, "in the spring of 1812, shortly before the separation. Abigail went still. "I went to him," Eleanor said, "with a concern about your health. I told him I was worried about you, that you had been unwell, that I feared for your stability." She paused. "I asked him to write a letter, to the effect that in his professional opinion you were not fully reliable, as a wife, as a future mother." The room was very quiet. "That letter," Eleanor continued, "was intended for the circuit court. In the event that Nathaniel pursued a legal separation on his own terms, rather than the one I had arranged. I wanted documentation that would prevent you from making any claim on the estate." She looked at Abigail with eyes that were tired and direct, and not asking for anything. "Nathaniel never knew. He never pursued the legal avenue, so the letter was never filed." "But it exists." "Where?" Abigail said. Her voice was perfectly steady. She was extraordinarily proud of that. "I destroyed it," Eleanor said. 3 weeks ago, I burned it myself." She paused. "I am telling you this because you should know it existed. And because—" She stopped. Something moved through her expression that was not quite apology and not quite grief, but occupied the space where both of those would live in a person capable of them. "Because what I did to you was not a single error in judgment. It was a campaign, and you should know the full scope of it." Margaret made a small sound beside Abigail. Abigail did not move. "Why are you telling me this now?" Abigail asked. "Because my son is happy," Eleanor said simply. "For the first time in 6 years, my son is genuinely happy, and I know why, and I know who is responsible for it." She looked at her hands. "I have spent 40 years protecting the Carter name and the Carter estate, and my son's future as I understood it. I understand it differently now." She looked up. "I will not interfere again. I want you to know that with the full accounting behind it, not as a promise made in ignorance of what I was capable of, but as a decision made with complete knowledge." The silence stretched. "Your sons," Eleanor said, and for the first time, something cracked in her composure just slightly, just at the edge. "My grandsons. Samuel came here once with Nathaniel. He asked me about the Carter Library. He sat in that library for 2 hours, and when he left, he thanked me and said it was a very fine collection." She pressed her mouth together briefly. "He has his grandfather's way of moving through a room." Abigail looked at her. "I am not forgiving you," Abigail said. "Not today. I don't know if I will. I'm not going to make you a promise about that. I'm not asking you to. But I am going to tell you something true." Abigail stood. "Those boys are going to need grandparents. They have lost enough people who should have been in their lives. I will not decide unilaterally that they must lose another." She picked up her gloves. "What happens from here depends entirely on what you do with what I just said." Eleanor looked at her for a long moment. "Nathaniel chose well," she said quietly. "The first time. I should have seen it." Abigail put her gloves on and walked to the door. "Yes," she said, "you should have." She told Nathaniel everything that evening. He listened without interrupting, which was his way, the same way he read, the same way he worked through problems, complete attention and no interference until the full picture was assembled. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "She burned it," he said. "She said she did." "Do you believe her?" Abigail thought about Eleanor's face in that sitting room, the tiredness in it, the way the composure had cracked slightly at the mention of Samuel, and thought about what it cost a woman like Eleanor Carter to say the things she had said in the room she had said them in to the person she had said them to. "Yes," she said. "I believe her." He absorbed this. "What do you want to do?" he asked. "I want to let the boys decide," she said. "When they're older, when they understand enough to make a real choice about it. In the meantime," she paused. "In the meantime, I'm not going to close the door." He looked at her. "You are," he said slowly, "a considerably more generous person than I am." "I have 3 boys," she said. Generous stopped being optional years ago. The harvest celebration came at the end of October. It had been Margaret's idea. The farm had had a genuinely good season. Despite everything, the land dispute was settled, and Margaret had pointed out, with the particular directness she had always possessed, that Abigail had spent 6 years not celebrating anything, and it was time to stop that. Abigail had agreed mostly to stop the argument. Nathaniel came. Several neighboring families came. Margaret came with her husband, who had arrived from Charlottesville 2 weeks earlier with his hat in his hands, and an apology that Margaret had accepted with considerably more grace than he probably deserved. A fact Abigail had mentioned to her, and Margaret had said, "I know. But I understand now that people do things for complicated reasons, and I am not above complicated reasons myself." The boys were extraordinary. Benjamin organized the children of 4 neighboring families into a game that appeared to involve a great deal of running and no discernible rules, but everyone was laughing, so the rules were evidently not the point. Samuel sat with 2 of the older farmers and held a serious conversation about soil composition that the farmers later told Abigail was the most interesting they'd had all season. Noah moved through the gathering the way he moved through everything, quietly noticing, appearing at the elbow of anyone who seemed to need company before they had identified the need themselves. At some point in the early afternoon, Abigail looked across the yard and saw Nathaniel standing with all 3 boys around him. Not orchestrated, not arranged, just happened, and Benjamin was demonstrating something with his arms that required considerable wingspan, and Nathaniel was watching with complete attention, and Samuel was adding corrections to whatever Benjamin was demonstrating, and Noah was standing with his shoulder pressed against Nathaniel's arm, in the particular way he pressed against people he had decided to trust. She looked at that for a long moment. Then Margaret appeared at her shoulder. "Say it," Margaret said. "Say what?" "Whatever you've been not saying for 4 months." Abigail looked at her old friend, rebuilt and different, and still underneath all of it, the person who knew her best. "I'm afraid," she said. "Still, I know what the truth is, and I know what I want, and I'm still afraid." "Of what?" "Of being wrong again." She kept her eyes on the yard. "Of building something and having it come apart. Of—" She stopped. "Of wanting something this much." Margaret was quiet for a moment. "Abby," she said, "look at those boys." She looked. "Do they look afraid?" Margaret asked. Samuel was now apparently correcting both Benjamin's demonstration and Nathaniel's response to it, and Nathaniel was accepting the correction with the gravity it deserved. Benjamin had grabbed Nathaniel's arm to demonstrate something, and Nathaniel had let him without adjusting his stance. Noah had his hand in Nathaniel's coat pocket, which was where Noah put his hand when he was entirely comfortable somewhere. "No," Abigail said. "They learned that from somewhere," Margaret said. "That capacity to trust what's in front of them." She paused. "They learned it from you." Abigail pressed her eyes closed briefly. When she opened them, Nathaniel had looked up and found her across the yard. He held her gaze for a moment, not saying anything, not making any gesture, just looking at her the way he had been looking at her for 4 months, steady and patient and entirely present. She walked across the yard. She stopped in front of him. The boys recalibrated instantly, Benjamin redirecting his demonstration to Noah Samuel, finding something in his pocket to examine all 3 of them, creating space with the instinctive social awareness of children who understood more than adults generally credited them with. "I need to tell you something," Abigail said. "All right," he said. She looked at him. At the man who had come back. Not dramatically, not with declarations and grand gestures, but Thursday after Thursday, fence post after fence post, one genuine question after another, consistent and present and true. "I'm done waiting," she said. He was very still. "Not because I'm not afraid," she said. "I'm still afraid. But I have been afraid for 6 years, and I built everything you see around you while I was afraid, and I have decided that afraid is not a good enough reason to stand still anymore." He looked at her for a long moment. "Are you asking me something?" he said quietly. "Or telling me something?" "Both," she said. He reached out and took her hand carefully, the way he did everything with full awareness of what he was doing and what it meant. "Then yes," he said. To both. Behind them, Benjamin let out a sound that was approximately the volume of a small cannon. Samuel, Noah said very calmly, you owe me 2 marbles. I know, Samuel said with the tone of a man who had known this was coming and had accepted it as the cost of reasonable expectations. Nathaniel looked over his shoulder at his sons. Did you bet on this? He asked. Benjamin bet against, Samuel reported. Noah and I took the other side. When? Abigail asked. August, Noah said serenely. You have been betting on my personal decisions since August. We prefer to think of it as informed confidence, Samuel said. Nathaniel looked at Abigail. She looked at him. And then for the first time, in a very long time in front of her farm and her friends, and 3 thoroughly unsurprised 6-year-old boys. Abigail Whitmore laughed until her eyes were wet, and Nathaniel Carter kept hold of her hand and laughed with her. And the October sun moved over Virginia the way it always had, the way it would continue to do long after all of them were gone, indifferent and golden and entirely beautiful. They were married in December. Small ceremony. The boys stood in a row in new coats, Benjamin slightly crooked, Samuel perfectly straight, Noah with his hands folded in front of him and his eyes moving between his mother and Nathaniel with an expression that was simply and completely satisfied, the expression of someone who has been waiting for something he knew was true to become officially true. Margaret stood beside Abigail. Aldridge stood beside Nathaniel. Outside the church, Virginia winter had laid itself over everything in white. When the minister asked Nathaniel if he took this woman, he said yes, with the directness of a man who had been meaning to say it for 6 years, and was glad to finally have the appropriate occasion. When he asked Abigail, she looked at Nathaniel for a moment before she answered. Not hesitating, just marking the moment the way you mark something you want to be able to remember exactly. Yes, she said. Benjamin punched the air. Noah pressed his eyes closed briefly in what appeared to be relief. Samuel straightened a fraction further, which was his version of the same thing. 2 years later, because some things require 2 years, require the ordinary accumulation of days and meals and arguments about fence lines and evenings reading by the fire and mornings where nothing remarkable happens and everything is fine. Nathaniel stood in the yard of the farm that was no longer Abigail's farm, but their farm, watching his sons chase each other through the field with the total physical abandon of 8-year-old boys who have no concept yet of all the ways the world will eventually ask them to slow down. Abigail came to stand beside him. She handed him a cup of coffee. He took it. They stood together and watched their sons. Samuel is going to fall, Nathaniel said. He's not going to fall. He's not watching where he's going. He never watches where he's going. He has some kind of internal navigation. Inherited from whom exactly? She looked at him sideways. Don't start. Benjamin had caught Noah by the collar, and they were both laughing too hard to stand properly, and Samuel had stopped running to observe the situation with his arms crossed and the expression of a scientist watching an experiment reach its inevitable conclusion. Nathaniel, Abigail said. Are you happy? He looked at her. It was such a plain question, and she asked it the plain way. She asked everything, not fishing for reassurance, not constructing an entrance to a larger conversation, just genuinely wanting to know the truth of it. He thought about the governor's ball and the glass he had almost dropped. He thought about 31 letters in a satchel and 6 years of mornings that had been missing something he hadn't allowed himself to name. He thought about crouching in a dirt yard and shaking a 6-year-old's hand while the boy complimented his coat buttons, and about natural history books, and a cow named Perseverance, and a fence post they had fixed together in October cold, and about a woman who had built everything around her from nothing, and had still somehow left room. Yes, he said. Simple. True. The only word that was equal to the question. She nodded, satisfied, and drank her coffee. Across the field, Benjamin finally went down, pulling Noah with him, and they hit the grass in a heap of laughter and coats. Samuel uncrossed his arms and walked over and looked down at them with tremendous dignity for approximately 3 seconds before Noah grabbed his ankle and he went down too. 3 boys in a field in Virginia. 8 years old and loud and alive and entirely, completely his. Nathaniel Carter stood beside his wife in the December morning and understood with the particular certainty that only comes when something has been genuinely earned that the greatest thing a man could possess was not the land that bore his name, or the wealth that carried his legacy, or the reputation that preceded him into every room. It was this ordinary, extraordinary morning. This woman beside him who had survived everything and chosen him anyway. These 3 boys who had grown up without him and forgiven him for it, and taught him in the process what it meant to be worth forgiving. Some things once broken cannot be repaired, but some things, the true things, the things built on honesty and patience, and the stubborn refusal to stop showing up, can be rebuilt into something stronger than what was there before. Abigail Whitmore had spent 6 years proving that, and Nathaniel Carter had spent the rest of his life being grateful that she had.